Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, we've talked about dying and rising gods and ideal types. Can you give us another example of an ideal type and kind of go into what specify what an ideal type is in the example that you'll give?
Yeah, a great example is that of a miracle story. Are all miracle stories the same? Well, no, but pretty close, because there are certain features that occur with regularity in a miracle story, though not always in the same order, and not always all of them. But you can't focus on the differences and say, well, there's no ground plan of a miracle story. For example, you find a stage setting. Where is the miracle worker? Is Jesus on the sea, or is he in the synagogue, or whatever? Is Apollonius of Tyana? Does he come upon a wedding, a funeral procession right after this woman has died right before she was to be married? What's he doing there? And the various other ones. Is Jesus out in the wilderness where there's nothing to eat? You need to know where it is usually. Then you have what they call sometimes a case history. There is some problem the miracle worker has to correct. It might be that these people have no food. They're going to starve. They're going to faint dead away on their way home. We got to feed them, but how? Lord save, we perish. The boat's about to capsize. Or this woman has had a hemorrhage for 12 years nonstop. Or this 12-year-old girl, so young yet cut off, she's dead. And you can just go on, and so something is wrong. Or in the Asclepius stories, testimonies of how people were healed, it'll say some guy who was blind came in, and he was so blind he had only a socket and not even an eye left. And some of them are fanciful, some are believable. A woman went to the Asclepius healing shrine because she had a pregnancy but could not deliver the child, and she hoped the healing God would help her. So there's a definite need. Well, the miracle worker says or does something that signals that, don't worry, he's going to take care of this. Like Jesus says, the girl is not dead, she's only asleep. Or who touched me with the woman with a hemorrhage, or he took the girl by the hand, and Apollonius said, put down the stretcher, and they'll say, oh, what's he going to do? Is he going to give a funeral oration or what? And on and on and on it goes. So there's some signal of intention. And then there is some kind of gesture or word that accomplishes the miracle. Little girl, I say to you, arise, or peace, be still, you give them food. And so something is in the offing here. What's going to happen? And then the miracle works. The girl returns to consciousness. The son of the widow of Nain comes back up out of the coffin. So does the woman that died on the day she was to be married, and so on and so forth. This is followed by, oh, I'm sorry, I left one out. Right before this, after the word or gesture that signals he's going to do something, there's often the skepticism of the bystanders. Outside Jairus' house, when Jesus says, she's not dead, she's just asleep. And they say, how do you know? And they laughed him to scorn. Or Jesus is going to stop the storm on the sea, and they said, Lord, do you not care if we all die? You of little faith, and so on and so forth. and there's not always that, but there usually is. And the point of it is to highlight the improbability of what the Savior is going to do. You've lifted the bar, but he's going to clear it anyhow. In the teeth of ridicule and scorn, he's going to win. Okay, so he does, and there's the sign. And there's a sign that proves that it's happened, like when Jesus says about Jairus' daughter, give her something to eat. Why does he say that? Well, to show she's not a ghost, because angels couldn't eat and so on. Why do the pigs run down the precipice into the lake? To show that the demons actually did flee the demoniac and went into the pigs. And otherwise, who knows what happened? The sea immediately goes quiet, and so on and so forth. And then there's the reaction, the acclaim of the crowd. We've never seen anything like this. God has visited his people. Who then is this whom even the wind and the waves obey? And so on and so on. This is like the skeleton of any old miracle story. It doesn't have to have every one of these items. Sometimes they're mentioned in retrospect, but you can map out all these miracle stories that will have most of these features. And that's F.F. Bruce didn't think that mattered much. He'd say it's like a police report. It's always pretty much going to sound the same. But I don't think that's adequate. It just seems to me there is a literary structure here where you can see the function of all the elements and so on. And it's not that these stories were copied from each other. It's just that if you're going to tell a miracle story, you're going to tell it this way. I mean, suppose it was based on something that happened, it's going to be told in a certain way. And this is important because it means that I think Greg Boyd and Paul Eddy say that there is a standardization factor, that as stories, even if they're factually true, once they start getting told, they get streamlined and all that. So you see, even though it looks like it might be a fictional story, maybe it isn't. And I said in a review, you're saying that even if it were factual, it doesn't look like it anymore, so why think it was factual? And that seems to be a fabrication, Occam's razor. Well, presumably it is. To say, oh, well, there was, like Euhemerism again, there was something a bit different that happened. Why posit that? It's a superfluous, extra explanation. And so it's important, the idea of an ideal type, and this is a great example of one.
That is very interesting you put it that way, because that's like what most people tell me, mythologizing history. This is history that's being mythologized, and instead of the idea of a myth becoming history, they say it's harder for that to happen. And I don't know if you've heard that before, but I was researching on for scholars. I'm trying to interview more scholars on the historical Buddha. And there was something on Wikipedia, or maybe it was a website that I read on, where they said, it's easier to mythologize something historical than it is to historicize something mythological. And I don't know if that's completely opinion.
Both happen, but I don't see. You have to look at the state of the evidence in any particular case. Both have happened, that's for sure, but it depends on whether there is any kind of reliable historical evidence. And if there isn't, you start thinking maybe this is a myth that has been brought down to earth.
That is interesting. I like how you phrase that. And another thing I was thinking about, and obviously it's not I've not read very much on this, but when you mention they didn't copy or borrow necessarily, you got to imagine that the stories that were widespread and heard carry these same themes. Mm-hmm. And these aren't just some farmers in the backwoods who wrote these. These are educated, they had to have known of other stories. So to say that they don't borrow, I guess to put more words in your mouth, you're not saying they didn't utilize tools like this. You're saying they didn't need Dionysus the Bacchae out wide open and look at it and go, okay, let's put that
Well,
over
actually,
here.
on that one, I am saying that.
Okay, so then the other
The
example.
basic idea of Dionysus as a slain and resurrected god, that was a common myth applied to different, or that occurred again and again in an agricultural society. Nobody needed to borrow that. But
Right.
Luke does certainly appear to have borrowed elements of this play, because sometimes it's virtually verbatim
Right.
between the two. So that happens, and syncretism is borrowing. So that happens too, for sure. But a lot of this stuff doesn't. And yet, like the 153 fish thing in John 21, that certainly seems to be borrowed from a tradition of Pythagorean hagiography, saints' legends, and so on. The story of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus is so much like the story from the Asclepium, the healing shrine, where I didn't follow through with that one, but the woman has gone to the shrine hoping to be delivered of this baby, and nothing happens. She's supposed to have a dream there where the god will tell her what to do or whatever, but nothing happens. So she and her husband are pretty depressed, headed back home. But suddenly, a mysterious stranger shows up and says, "What's the problem here? You seem to be pretty sad." And they explain, and he says, "Well, put down the stretcher." They don't know who this guy is. And he does whatever he does, and she does give birth to a whole bunch of tapeworms. She wasn't pregnant, though she was extended. And so she's okay now. And then Asclepius vanishes, and they go on their way rejoicing. Tell me that is not like the Emmaus Road thing. And they don't recognize him until he does the miracle and the whole shebang. I think that is so close, and there's no reason to think Luke would not have known it. I mean, we still know it. And it seems to me that's very likely borrowed. The thing with Apollonius raising the bride from her funeral bier, that is so much like the widow of Nain's story that you really have to wonder if that's been borrowed. But who knows, because there are various other stories even in the New Testament where with Peter called on as if he's Superman and somebody's got a cat in the tree to get down. They call in Peter. Well, he's the superhero. He can do something about Dorcas, who's dead now. What do you look up Resurrector in the Yellow Pages? But he ought to be able to do something, so he does come, and he puts everybody out of the upper room, just like Elijah, and he says, the woman's name is Dorcas, or in Hebrew Tabitha, and as Jesus said, "Little girl, Talitha Kumi," he says, "Tabitha, arise." So it kind of looks like maybe there were a whole bunch of versions of this story. So was it borrowed? Was it a variant version told independently? Who knows? But that doesn't really matter, because the goal is not to say, oh, all this stuff is stolen. That's really beside the point and unverifiable. It's just that they're all of a particular type. And if you're going to dismiss any of them as myths, why don't you admit the others are?
Join our Patreon